Welcome to the second episode of my podcast, Figuring It Out. And in this episode, I wanted to explore something slightly different. I wanted to explore a side of travel that we don't always see on social media. Instagram, TikTok, it all just shows you a luxurious version of traveling. I think even solo traveling, it makes it seem very luxurious, and that's not always the case. Sometimes we have experiences when we travel that definitely don't quite make it to social media. And I wanted to share a personal story that happened to me one of the first times I traveled solo that was really a wake up call and made me realize that things don't always go to plan. This is definitely not intending to put people off travel. It's just to show that sometimes things can happen that are out of our control. And sometimes it's the way we deal with it that can help us move on and can also make us a stronger person and can just teach us lessons that perhaps we didn't think of before. So I'm going to start by talking about how I planned my trip to Prague. Now, I was 21 at the time and I applied to volunteer at some hostels. This can be an actual really good way to travel cheaply because you can stay at the hostels for free and you can work, and that's how you make the money. And often they'll provide you food as well. So if you have a spare summer where you don't have any plans and you'd love to travel but with limited funds, it can be an excellent way to enable you to travel. So my plan was to go to Prague, to work there for a month and perhaps visit a few countries while I had some days off. So I felt pretty good. I felt pretty confident despite having sort of never really traveled alone out of the country before. I was ready and I was excited. I'd looked on Instagram, I'd done research, and I was happy, I was ready. And I just remember the first night when I got there, it wasn't quite what I expected. I was kind of expecting to be welcomed with open arms, to make a million friends on the first night, but I can just remember sitting in the bed of my hostel dorm on a top bunk, 10-bed dorm, which I'd never really experienced before, thinking, what am I doing in this country? Why am I here? And in that moment, I generally thought, should I just book a flight home? And I think that can be the case for a lot of people. Often it just takes a few days, meeting people, putting yourself out there to actually start to really embrace a solo trip. But the first night just wasn't going to happen. So I went to bed early. I woke up the next day and I decided to be more confident. I chatted to an Australian guy. We got along really well, ended up having a wander around the town, met a few other people, and had a really good day. And I was feeling a lot more confident by that point. So that night I heard that there was a bar crawl. Those are very common, especially in sort of Eastern Europe, and very cheap as well. A lot of the time they actually have all you can drink, which is a dangerous game, but I hadn't really drank yet and I was quite keen to sort of have something to help me socialize. So I went along, and because I was technically a hostel volunteer, I also got to go for free. So that felt like a bonus. So I got there, they gave us a cup and they said, just keep bringing the cup up and you can fill it up as many times as you want with beer, wine, spirits, essentially anything you want. And we were in this underground bar, which I wasn't too familiar with the location because we'd all gone as a group, we'd jumped on a tram. So I kind of just went with the flow. And yeah, the night took a bit of a turn. I found myself blacking out one or two times. I have little flashbacks of things that happened, but I can't fully remember each thing in order. But all I can really make out from it is that one minute I was in the bar, the next I was walking along on the street and a taxi offered me a lift. So I got in, and then I remember feeling very sick. I remember being a little bit sick on myself, which is quite disgusting, but I think we've all been there. And then a very handy taxi driver, which understandably was demanding money. So I gave him as much money as I had, which was quite a lot of money. Enough, I would say, to definitely cover the fare and cleaning fees. But apparently that wasn't enough. So he was quite demanding. Next thing I remember being at a cash point, taking money out, which equated to over £200, I realised the next day. Yeah, I have little flashbacks of kind of taking the money, running, and then the taxi being next to me and throwing the money in the window. It was all very hazy. And then next thing, I woke up on the ground, face down in the middle of the street. It was light at this point, and I was woken up because I felt someone, child about 10 to 12, was had their hand in my pocket and they were trying to steal my wallet. So I jumped up in surprise and they just kind of walked away laughing, I think. And yeah, that was it. I realized I was in the middle of the street. I'd passed out all night on the floor and my phone was gone. So the only thing I had left was my wallet. Surprisingly, that was still there, and my bank card. So initially, I checked. I saw a nearby cash point. I checked my balance, and it had been cleared out. There was quite a few hundred that had gone. So that was a big hit. I can remember just kind of sort of like having kind of a silent scream in the street, just thinking, crap, what am I going to do? Because also I didn't know which way it was to my hostel. I knew it was in an area called Prague Free, but I didn't know where that area was. So I just walked and walked. And eventually I found a petrol station garage. I went in, there was happened to be a big map behind the counter, and I just sort of said to the person who didn't speak English, where am I? And they pointed, and I happened to be actually quite close to where the hostel was. I was in the right area. So I kind of just made out the best way possible to get back. Got back to the reception, told the receptionist what happened. They very much sympathised with me. They told me where the nearest police station was. From there, I realised that yeah, I'd had quite a bad night, and I just felt a bit like what a disaster. What can I do? So the next thing I thought was I just need to do everything I can to sort of make people aware that I'm safe. Luckily, they had a computer room in the hostel. They don't always have them these days, but someone might lend you their phone. I also went to the police station to report what had happened. They weren't overly helpful, unfortunately. Obviously, due to the fact that I was drinking, I probably wasn't taken as seriously. However, I reported it anyway. I spoke to people at the hostel. It kind of took me back a little bit because it was not what I'd expected from a night out. I expected to have a few drinks, to make some friends, and to just enjoy the time I had away, and it definitely didn't go that way. I spoke to a couple of the people I was out with when I saw them back at the hostel, and I mean, they were strangers, so they had no responsibility for me, but they said, "Oh, sorry to hear that," and just kind of shrugged it off because you do hear a lot of stories like this in hostels, but I think it's also important to realize that they can affect you. Obviously, it affected me by losing the money, which was frustrating because I had a very limited budget, hence why I was volunteering, and also the emotional toll it can take on you. I'd gone out to a new country intending to volunteer for a month, thinking I'd have all these amazing experiences. And it's not to say that I wouldn't, but the first experience I had just happened to be a negative one, and it changed my outlook a little bit. I felt quite negative, if I'm honest. I do think it's okay to have those emotions. I went through something that was quite traumatizing. I needed to take the time to process it. However, I was also still in a foreign country. There was people everywhere having a great time, and I didn't want to ruin the vibe. I wanted to still enjoy myself, but it was hard. It was hard to still enjoy myself after something like that had happened. So I did make the choice to get an earlier flight back, and I spent less than a week in Prague in total. And I did go back, and initially I did feel a bit like I'd failed. I felt like this was my chance to go away for a month or to experience new things and to have the time that things like Instagram show you. But in this case, it just didn't happen. Looking back, I don't regret my decision. I think if I'd have forced myself to stay, I just think how I was feeling based on what had happened. I wasn't feeling safe. I wasn't feeling secure. I needed to give myself some time to go back and to sort of get over that experience. It took me a while to even consider solo traveling again. However, once I kind of found the new confidence to go and do it again, perhaps make slightly different choices, it was definitely worthwhile. I initially started traveling to closer places. I went to Ireland, I went to Dublin, I then went to Edinburgh as well. So one was just a train, one was a flight. And I started to find a love for solo traveling again, a love that I'd kind of lost. And I'd lost it over a couple of years, especially due to COVID as well. That had stopped me going, which had also decreased my confidence. However, after I had started traveling again, I started to realize how common stories like this are. when you do travel, you do start to think, like initially you think that everyone is having a great time all the time and nothing can possibly go wrong. Especially when you're young, you just kind of feel a bit like you're invincible. But the more I've traveled, the more it's made me realize that these things can happen. They can happen at any age, they can happen to anyone, and it's not your fault. It's generally being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And of course, it's not my responsibility that it happened, but it is my responsibility of how I dealt with it. And I think, given what had happened, I dealt with it in the best way that I could. And I don't regret that. I mean, obviously, it's a shame that I wasn't able to spend the whole month there, but it just goes to show that sometimes the trips that we plan won't always go as we want them to. However, ever since then, I've been on so many amazing trips and I've had such a good time. And when small inconveniences have happened and slightly larger ones, I've just had to deal with them the best that I can. I don't think there's a wrong or a right way. I just think it's all part of the experience of traveling and we all learn a lesson from it. And I feel anyone listening probably has stories of their own, but I felt appropriate to talk about mine on this particular episode and just talk about the way that we shouldn't let the risk stop us from enjoying life, because everywhere you turn there are risks. There's risks going out in your hometown, and of course there's risks when you fly somewhere else. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been a little bit on the darker side, I think, but it's just to show that these things can happen to anyone. And if anyone wants to comment and let me know if they've had any experiences, I'd be interested to hear. I think it's good that we talk about these things and we show that travel isn't always like Instagram shows. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to bring out a new episode soon.